Okay, guys, I wanted to share with you a little reflection. So, there are two movies that I've been thinking about recently as a pair. The first one is considered, at least according to one list that I saw, Woody Allen's worst movie. It's called Whatever Works, and it stars Larry David, the comedic genius behind Curb Your Enthusiasm and co genius behind Seinfeld with Jerry Seinfeld. Whatever Works, that's one movie, and spoiler alert, I'll be saying something about it. The other one is called Another Round. And here's why I've been thinking about these two movies together, because in Another Round, spoiler alert as well, you have several friends who do an experiment. And what they're testing is what the quality of life becomes when you regularly imbibe alcohol at a certain level. So they have some sort of idea that we've evolved evolutionarily to have a lower blood alcohol level than is optimal. And these four or five friends, I can't remember exactly how many, four, I think, each in a different station in their lives, each, dealing with their own characteristics, personalities, difficulties, relationships, and all the rest of it. They agree throughout the day that they're going to keep their blood alcohol level higher than normal and gradually increase it. Now, what happens is that this goes well for some of the people and it doesn't go well for everybody. Okay. And you can see there, just in what I said, the idea that whatever works. Like for somebody, a little bit more alcohol actually makes his life better in the movie. Okay. And for somebody else, he goes off the deep end. He can't. He'd be better off with nothing. It's actually pretty interesting because a book that I've been teaching called Plato's Laws, I think possibly Plato's greatest dialogue, definitely something you must read if you have any interest in Plato, and even if you don't. One of the conversations that takes place among the participants in the dialogue called Plato's Laws concerns wine drinking. In fact, so this is actually kind of interesting. The movie is about Another Round and how drinking affects us. Well, in the laws, the idea of a drinking party or drinking together is discussed as an example of an institution that can work well if it's run well. In other words, if it's run by a wise and sober ruler. So why would a wise and sober ruler be able to use a drinking party to his benefit? What does that have to do with politics and law? And the idea is that you can sort of test people's characters by getting them drunk. You can see what they think, what they want, what they say when their guard is down. And that's valuable information for anybody who's going to be teaching people to face their pleasures with courage, just as a trainer of warriors has to teach them to face their fears with courage. Okay, so the main character in the laws is an Athenian. He's talking to a Spartan and a Cretan. And the Spartan and the Cretan, they're like, yeah, we raise soldiers, warriors. We send them out in the winter with no shoes. And they go up and down the mountain carrying very heavy loads and all of this. Like, we put them through their paces. We break them. We make them face everything that could be considered fearful or painful. And the Athenian stranger says, all right, that's good. You've produced their ability to withstand pain. But have you produced any ability for them to withstand pleasure? And they don't even understand what he's talking about. And that's where the wine drinking and the wine parties come in. He says, if you had a miracle drug that could expose people to fearful situations without actually having to risk their death, like you do in real military training, wouldn't a general use that, like exploit the possibility of a fear pill to help instill courage into his people? Well, wine is kind of like a pleasure pill. Okay? It's a pleasure potion, a pleasure drink. And you could use it for educational purposes. But he says, unless you're running a drinking party in this way, absolutely under the rule of a wise and sober ruler, then it would be better if you didn't drink at all. And so there too, there's not a single fast rule for everybody. But it's kind of like, here's what it's good for, here's what it's bad for. And done intelligently, it could be useful. Done unintelligently, nothing is useful. Well, at any rate, in this movie, Another Round, you see that you couldn't say nobody should have another drink. Nobody should have another round. Everybody should be cut off. And I was just thinking about it because I spend a lot of time on Twitter, X, more than I should probably, as I'm editing, as I'm doing other things, just see what my friends and other people I know are saying on there. I sometimes contribute myself to it. And from time to time, you'll get life advice. You'll see life advice. I try not to give life advice myself, but you come across accounts like that. Oh, cut out this, add this, do that. Make sure you follow rule A, B, or C. And you think, you know what? There is no rule that's going to fit for everybody. I mean, like, it's an old idea of classical political philosophy. The doctor doesn't heal man as such, he heals this particular man. And you might have some thought about what's good for man as such, but in the case of this particular man, you know, you can't really say for sure. Now, we're excluding the obvious cases, okay? Like, you may want to cut back on the excessive drug use, or don't eat, 20 pounds of French fries a day, all of that kind of stuff. Fine, let's say that that's not a whatever works situation, but there's a lot of room in between. And in the movie Whatever Works, it's, I wouldn't call it traditional in the sense that it's not a movie that champions the traditional family and religious head of the household and, the perfect situation. I mean, the whole point of that movie is that things are not picture perfect. And if in this rotten, crazy, chaotic world, you can find some sort of love in whatever form it appears, then, whatever works. So somebody ends up divorced and remarried, and Larry David's character has his own trials and tribulations, as you can imagine. And at the end, things fall into, I don't want to spoil the whole thing for you. They fall however they fall. But the point there is whatever works to find love. And I don't know, I was just thinking about this because, again, there are a lot of voices out there on one hand saying, no, whatever works is wrong. That's where you get into all kinds of degeneracy and all kinds of signs of crisis and collapse. And that's how you know we're at the end of times in the Kali Yuga and everything's degenerate if it's just a matter of whatever works. That's like too pragmatic. And where's the higher truth in that? Where's the spirituality in that? Where's the morality in that? Where's the soul and substance in that? Whatever works. Seems kind of too mechanical, seems kind of too mercenary. But it's kind of true to a certain extent. I've mentioned on this channel that I started doing jiu-jitsu, Brazilian jiu-jitsu. Right now I'm out with a little bit of an injury, but for me, it's great. I go 3 times a week. I love it. It puts me in a good mood. I can't get enough. I come home. When I have some time, I study the positions. I watch the matches. I learn about the sport, and I enjoy it. But for somebody else, you recommend that they do it. And I know somebody who is seriously injured in it. And there's somebody else who maybe prefers a non-combat sport. They want to play tennis. What are you going to tell them? Force them to do jiu-jitsu when they'd rather play tennis? So something about these two movies, that in love, you find whatever works. And that can take many different forms. And this is not some sort of postmodern liberal propaganda. And this is not, anything goes under all circumstances. But it does show you there's not necessarily one pattern or one mold that you can expect everybody to fix. Life is complicated. People are complicated. Our desires are complicated. And, you're not dealing with man as such. You're dealing with this particular man. You're going to be a vegetarian. Someone else eats nothing but meat all day long. Steak for breakfast, steak for lunch, steak for dinner. Who's right? Whatever works. You have your physiology, they have theirs. You've got your metabolism, they have theirs. You have what you want to accomplish. Maybe you're trying to become a spiritual and you think that meat stands in the way of that. Or maybe you're trying to become more grounded and you think that a vegetarian diet stands in the way of that. So I don't know. I'd love to know what you think about the movies if you've watched them, and let me know what you think. Is this an arbitrary combination? I don't think so. These two things fit. You have to sort of experiment and see what's good for you. And in the best case scenario, you have somebody who has a lot of experience, who's seen many cases, and who can give you some advice about what might work for you so that you're not fully left to your own devices. But in a sense, you do have to find out for yourself. You can't substitute anybody for you. You're the one that this affects, what you do, what you practice, who you love, how you live. And, to a certain extent, whatever works. But that said, there are wise guides. In my opinion, this is one of the wisest among them, the great Socrates. You can learn about the great Socrates from different sources. This one here, Xenophon, is well worth your consideration. Don't think that you can only learn about Socrates from the great Plato. You can also learn about Socrates from the great Xenophon. And in this work, the Conversations of Socrates, or the Memorabilia, where Xenophon recounts conversations that Socrates had, you'll see that there's a lot of very sound life advice that you can get from a wise man who just asks you, he doesn't tell you a big doctrine, a big dogma, give you a big spiel, warn you about heaven and hell. Not that there's anything wrong with that. But he gives you very basic questions. I can give you a lot of examples. I mean, people come to Socrates and they say, hey, I'm fighting with my wife, or I'm fighting with my mother, I'm fighting with my brother. Hey, Socrates, you know what? The economy is down and I'm not making enough money to take care of my family. Or they say, I'm too shy to go into politics. Yeah, maybe I have some skill. Yes, it's true. I like to talk to people. I could probably do better than the bums in office, but you know what? I'm not much of a public person. I'd rather not. Socrates talks some sense into them. Another person who says, I don't need anybody. I can live, I'll just go my own way. I won't upset anybody. I'll just sort of survive like a ghost. Socrates says, you can't survive like a ghost. You live in a city. You've got friends and enemies. You can't just be a nondescript foreigner and believe that nobody's going to notice you and nothing's going to happen. You have to make yourself good. You have to make yourself better. And this isn't some sort of, mystical, magical guessing game. There are ways to make yourself better. If you want to get better at tennis, what do? You practice tennis, find a tennis coach, go put some time in on the court. Okay, if you want to get better at talking to people, you got to talk to people, learn how to get better. He's got people who come to him and say, I'm not very good at making friends. Socrates says, okay, so let's see, how do you make a dog like you? How do other people attract your attention? You do favors for them, you care about them, you show an interest in them. It's not obvious. It's important in life. To be a good friend and to have good friends is important in life. But not everybody knows how to do it. And Socrates talks some sense into them, some good sense into them. There are even funny passages, if we don't go into a deep interpretation of them. He goes to what would you call her? Kind of like a high class, let's say a woman who gives favors for money, has a nice conversation with her. He says, well, look, who's benefiting whom here? Are we more benefited by seeing you, or are you, because he goes with his friends, or are you more benefited by us seeing you? Who gets the benefit here? Because you get the attention when we look at you, and we just get a sort of unfulfilled desire and longing that we might feel bad about later. And he says, nevertheless, you've learned how to be beautiful and persuasive and make people feel like they need you. And there's something to that. So comedy as well as other things. And when people want to go into politics, for example, some people want to go on, I'll give you the example of the person who didn't want to go into politics, even though he had the ability. And Socrates says, hey, if you have the ability, you could do good for yourself. You could bring honor to your city. You could help your friends. You could do a lot of good things if you go into politics as a man who actually possesses knowledge, understanding, competence, skill, and all the other things that you need. But there are also people who want to go into politics who lack all of that. And Socrates talks to them too. You see that in Plato as well, for example, in the dialogue on Alcibiades. Alcibiades is a beautiful case of somebody who's convinced he can rule over the Athenians, and Socrates gets it into his head that maybe he could rule over a larger empire than that. But he also tells him, if you want to be a ruler of men, you have to inquire into what it is to rule and what it is to be good and what it is to become better than you are, things that Alcibiades hasn't really thought about. He thinks because he's good looking and young and noble born, he has pretensions to political rule, and Socrates shows that that's not enough. Speaking of young, competent rulers, I saw a very nice interview today of Tucker Carlson with Bukele, El Salvadoran leader. Highly recommended, okay? He says so many things that are simple, kind of Socratic in the sense that when Tucker interviewed Putin gave a very long answer. By the way, Socrates as a rule does not like long answers. In Plato's dialogues, when Socrates talks to somebody, he says, listen, let's make an agreement. I'll ask you questions and you give me short answers. And then I'll ask you a follow-up question, you give me a short answer. And we'll avoid very long speeches. So Socrates typically discourses like that. But Putin, you saw, right? Back ever since the beginning of time, who's had this land and that land and Rurik this and Vladislav that, and the whole history, right? The whole history from the first day of creation, which is important for his territorial claims. And it's important for his understanding of Russia's identity and all the rest of that, not disputing. But the El Salvadoran leader, Bukele, his answers were much more Socratic, I think. Much more common sense, down to earth, simple. But the kind of simple, down to earth common sense that we no longer practice. You see? So he said, for example, it's common sense to pray to God for wisdom so that you act wisely, so that your policies are good, so that you know what you're doing, so that the things that fall out of your scope and are in the hands of chance or providence are well attended to. That's Socratic. Socrates says, there are some things that belong to the domain of skill. I don't need to pray to God to do something that is within my control. For the things that are within my control, I rely on skill, art, knowledge, technique, okay? I don't miraculously get the ability to build a great kitchen by praying. I can build a good kitchen because I have carpentry and design and all the rest of it. Not me, I can't do that. But I mean somebody who can do that, okay? A cabinet maker, a designer, a builder, whatever. You follow the rules of the art. You know, there's an art of shoemaking. You follow those rules and you'll make a good shoe. There's farming. You follow the rules, you'll make a good crop and all the rest of it. So there's something that falls within the art that's under your control, and that you should work to do as well as you can. Rely on your skill. But a portion of every art, a portion of every such undertaking is outside of our control. And there it's appropriate to pray. So the doctor may know how to heal a person, but he doesn't know that the person he heals is going to go out into the world and do good and not do bad. You got to sort of pray for that. Or, you know, you can sow your seeds correctly, but you're not exactly sure that, you know, you can't control the weather. So you have to pray for the things that are out of your control. So this combination of a wise policy and piety, prayer, divine support, a combination of human skill and divine support. It's very Socratic. And I think it was very nice that Bukele said that. If Tucker asked him, he said, you know, I heard you give a speech about your 3-point plan for fixing the economy, and your first point was pray to God for wisdom. And I thought that was interesting. And Bukele says, yeah, isn't it common sense? You know, before you set out on a policy, especially a policy where not everything depends on you, pray for guidance, pray for wisdom, and pray for help. And then you put your policy into place, okay? You don't only rely on the prayer and skill. So that was a very nice interview. Other things he said that I think were insightful about democracy and about, you know, he had this reflection where he says, look, don't, you know, let's say like, don't build a city on the bottom of a mountain that experiences landslides and volcanoes all the time, you know, or whatever, right? Don't tempt fate and fortune. Don't set yourself up for failure. Okay. Don't do something in a way that sets you up for failure. You know that nothing in this world is permanent, and that if you're going to establish something and keep it established for a while, you have to sort of build it intelligently and maintain it well, right? So he said he had some advisor or somebody on his team who was building a wall in a place where he thought it shouldn't have been built because, again, it was likely that it wasn't going to remain there for a long time. Just the natural conditions of the place were such that, like I said, building near a mudslide, if you know there's going to be a mudslide, don't put something there that you expect to be there for a long time. So his point was both the intelligence of doing it well in the first place, but also the importance of keeping things well maintained. And, you know, he said that's democracy, for example, today needs to be well maintained, but nobody has really done a good job of that. And therefore it's on the decline. Give many examples, many of which I'm sure you can see with your own eyes, but I'll spare you the details because I think you should watch that interview, Tucker and Bukele. Why do I mention it though? Again, because you have some good Socratic insights, I would say, at a simple level here. I'm not saying that he's going into the, you know, I'm not saying Bukele is Socrates, and I'm not saying that interview is the same as a Platonic dialogue where you see Socrates asking what is justice or something like that. Just from the point of view of sound common sense. And in this presentation of Socrates that you get in Xenophon, you find a lot of sound common sense. And as I said earlier, from one point of view, whatever works. And partially, that itself is sound common sense. You know what I mean? Not everybody wears extra long, extra tall like I do, because not everybody's 6'7". And not everybody's going to do this or that. It depends on their particular situation. So find those rules that work well, no matter who you are. Become good, become better at whatever you do. And find teachers like Socrates who give you the good, down-to-earth, practicable advice. Kinds of things you overlook. Why should you care more about your shoes than about your friends? That doesn't make any sense. That's common sense that you should care more about your friends than about your shoes, right? You should pick your friends with at least as much care as you put into picking your shoes. And you should Take care of your friends with at least as much care as you put into taking care of your property. That's basic. But these are the kinds of basic things that unless you have somebody remind you about them, especially at an age that is devoid of common sense in many respects, then you can easily overlook them. So that's what I wanted to talk to you about. Okay, whatever works. A good funny movie, you can just watch it and enjoy it all by itself. Same with Another Round, a good movie that you can watch and enjoy all by itself. The combination of the two gets us to think about the fact that different practices affect, the same practice can affect different people in different ways. And somehow you just got to see what works for you. Socrates with his good common sense, and Tucker's Bukele interview. And I also mentioned Plato's Laws, possibly Plato's greatest dialogue. In fact, one of the few cases where Socrates is not in that dialogue. Usually in Plato's works, Socrates is like the main character, as I say, without getting into the disputes here about the importance of the other characters in Plato's dialogues, you could say for all intents and purposes that Socrates is the main character in most of Plato's dialogues, if not in all of them. But in the Laws, he doesn't even appear. The main character there is called the Athenian Stranger. The Athenian Stranger. And he's talking to an old Cretan and Spartan. Absolutely amazing book. I'm doing a course on it in my school. Read it, put it on your reading list. Make sure you read Plato's Laws, even the first 10 pages. Okay, even the first 10 pages are really amazing. So anyway, I just thought we'd chit chat for a little bit about that. Hope you enjoyed that. Take care and see you in the next video.